everybody that we are being live streamed, so that anybody who's joining us via the internet are able to watch our proceedings. Can I also say that I've been told that there are no fire alarms planned this morning, so if the fire alarm goes off, please follow the instructions which will be given, which will be leaving through that door and exiting down the front. And can I also ask people that when they do speak, they press the button in front of them on the microphones and likewise switch it off when they've finished speaking. This is my first meeting as such, with actual meeting in a room with people from Transport for the North. Can I thank those people who spoke so kindly of me when I was being nominated. I hope I live up to the expectations and am able to do the job that you've trusted me to do. Can I also say that I'm more than open to any private representations about things that you might want us to do differently, and please contact me privately if you want to. If you've got any suggestions as to how we might change and alter things, I'm more than happy to listen and to talk about the way in which things are done. Can I also place on record my thanks to Louise Gittings for all the work she did in the interim period as chairman. Louise, I'm looking to you to put me on the right track if I'm getting some things wrong, but thank you very much indeed for the work you did then. Can I also, at this stage, say a very big thank you to those people whose meetings, it will be their last meetings, because they're stepping down from their roles. I don't want to single out any particular people, but just to say, you know, I very much appreciate the work you've put in the past, and I hope you don't feel, sometimes when we go from public office, we're sort of, you know, almost cast to one side. I hope you feel you can still help and guide us where we are getting certain things wrong, and we don't want to lose the experience of people around the table. So I hope you will always feel a friend of Transport for the North and able to contribute to us and tell us if we're getting something catastrophically wrong, which I hope we don't. And on that, can I then move on to ask if there are any declarations of interests that any members may have relating to items directly on the agenda? Okay, fine, thank you. In that case, can I then ask that we approve the minutes which have been circulated of the meetings held on the 25th of January and the 23rd of February. Are people content with those? Louise has moved them, seconded. Thank you very much indeed. Then if we can move on, please, to perhaps the first substantive item, which is the budget and the business planning for the 22-23. I'm going to ask Martin to start up on this, and then Paul Kelly will speak in more detail to the papers. Martin.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to be here with you in Leeds today. I'm just going to kind of just give you a bit of an update of where we are in terms of the business planning process, and then invite Paul Kelly as the finance director to just talk about how we're dealing with things in the first quarter, because we do need today to get your approval for how we manage the first quarter as part of a budget, and working towards a final budget for the rest of the year at our meeting in June. Just to kind of say, in terms of the business planning process, we are moving forward on the basis of the conversation that we had with you in February, where I set out the focus in terms of how we would prioritise our activities for the year ahead to reflect the funding that we've got, to also reflect our strategic role as Transport for the North. If you remember, the conversation I set out, or the framework I set out, was talking about how we've got that role around setting a strategy, which is very much underpinned by the regional evidence base, the work that we need to do to update the independent economic review, the work that then flows from that into the update on the strategic transport plan, and using that as a way of then shaping our advice to government and indeed national agencies around the investment programme. You'll recall how we set out that one of the key almost unique capabilities we have as Transport for the North is the analytical team, the evidence base and the analytical team, and that needs to be at the heart, as it always has been, of the work that we do moving forward, and that's very much in my mind as I work through the priorities for the business plan for the year ahead. What's also clear to me is the importance of strengthening our relationships, whether it's with Network Rail, and Rob's here today, so it's good to have that relationship, but also with Adam and National Highways. And you've got on the partnership board a conversation about the relationship between TfN and National Highways, particularly in the context of the road investment strategy. I think that's an illustration of how we've got strong relationships already with these national infrastructure agencies, but the opportunity for us through the business planning is to actually strengthen that further so that our colleagues in national agencies are drawing on our analytical and the evidence base and using that to shape what's being moved forward. I think the other thing I would just emphasise at this point in terms of business planning, later in the agenda you've got a number of items coming to you which for me illustrate how we add value already as a regional centre of excellence, using that analytical capability to then work with partners, you as partners, to develop things forward. And I think that's an illustration of the kind of work we need to continue doing moving forward. In terms of where I am, we're prioritising activities at the moment. There will be a need to redesign the organisation to reflect those priorities, but that will also need to be taking account of the need to downsize, and I've talked to you previously about the fact that we will need to be a smaller organisation. Just in that context, to let the board know, I'm currently opened to receive applications for voluntary redundancy, which is something I flagged at the previous meeting. That's been open since Monday of last week, and I've invited applications by the end of this week, and I will then take a view about how we move forward, where there are opportunities to deal with those. Two risks that I would just flag at the moment. Firstly, there is we set out into papers before about the importance of the relationship between ourselves and the department around the analytical team, around TAME, and we set out in the paperwork about how that will be overseen by what we call the grant funding arrangement with the GFA. I just need to flag to the board that for a variety of reasons, we've not made as much progress with that in the last few weeks as I would hope. Therefore, it is a risk that we're having to manage, and we are in discussion with Simon and colleagues from the department about getting the what's called the GFA sorted out as quickly as possible. I think we're anticipating it will be with us very soon, because it does then allow us to shape up the structure for the TAME response that needs to support the department. So that is a risk that's being actively managed at the moment. The other risk that I'm having to manage through the business planning process is colleagues will know, board members will know, that we had we had funding confirmed for 1 year, which I think is very consistent with what local authorities have in most instances. Just to know, that is a risk to me, because it means it doesn't give the kind of clarity perhaps in the longer term to be able to be most efficient in terms of business planning. I have raised this with the department, and again that's an ongoing conversation with the department about whether there is more that we can do in terms of our planning assumptions beyond the first year. To me, it's been slightly highlighted by the fact that my colleagues and other STBs have got that kind of planning framework. But as I said, at this point, it is a risk. I'm having to manage it, but there is an active conversation with the department about how do we manage that risk and actually provide some planning framework within which we can prepare the final business plan. That, Chair, is kind of where we are business planning. Just to kind of flag to the board members, I may well look to have an informal conversation with you as board members about how we are getting on with the detail of the business planning process, and I would anticipate that potentially being towards the end of April, so that I have an opportunity to share with you where the thinking has got to before we then finalise the paperwork and the budget for your consideration in June. I think that would be a very helpful and very useful conversation. At that point, Chairman, might I just invite Paul Kelly to talk about the first quarter and how we're managing that.
Thank you, Martin. As Martin said, the business planning process is underway as we speak, and with the intention of it being finished for presentation to the June board. And as we discussed at the last meeting, what we said is we wouldn't have time to bring a full budget and business plan to this meeting, and therefore we're bringing an interim budget. So section 5.3 on the report, just focusing on that presents our interim budget for quarter 1. I've also extended it for an indicative view for future quarters, but it is only indicative at this stage. So what it shows a budget in Q1 of £3.9 million, as detailed in table 5.3 of the papers. The sections that are highlighted programmes, again, these are probably areas that members will be very aware of. Northern Powerhouse Rail have a relatively modest budget, but that represents the closure costs of the programme. The department have agreed to honour and meet all costs associated with the closure of the programme, which was very encouraging to us. So that represents accommodation costs and contractual costs that can't be mitigated, for example, licences and costs such as that. We've then got the MPR Analytical support line, which is a line that was referenced by Martin. This was the team that's been retained within TFN to deliver the modelling work going forward. It is a one-year ring-fence budget, but again, what we've got is £1.5 million in the funding allocation letter that maintains the capability, and then we've got a whole series of additional procurements that need to be agreed as the scope gets agreed to underpin the various bits of work the department would require. There's a line for development projects in the quarter budget, but obviously there's nothing in it. That relates to the 6 schemes that we had India funding for from last year, and it's just that no activity will be envisaged to incur in quarter 1. However, the procurement will be progressed, so the activities are anticipated to fall in future quarters. In terms of so moving on to the rail operations and the operational areas. So of the rail operations is partially funded by Rail North grants and also partially funded by core grants. A relatively modest element of it is funded through core grants. So section 5.7 details the core funded activities within TFN, and I think this sort of brings it home. I think really is that funding, that level of expenditure is what's required and what can be delivered within the funding envelope that we have. What members will probably notice is that it's heavily weighted towards salaries, which is representative of the current salary base that we have today. But obviously, as Martin has mentioned, we've got a VR programme out as we speak, and we're also going through a business planning process that would see activities prioritised and resourced appropriately to fit within the funding envelope. So we'd anticipate that salary line reducing somewhat, and the discretionary spend, which is effectively the commission spend to underpin the various programmes and activities, increasing somewhat. In terms of then moving across to the funding, how it's going to get funded. So there are sort of 2 main sources of funding for TFN going forward. There's ring-fence grants, which will cover the MPR closure costs, the TAME modelling function, the development projects that I mentioned before, and also Rail North grants. They're all ring-fenced, so to the extent they're utilised, they obviously they can be drawn down, but also if they're not for any reason, then they would also be passed back or be returned. What we tend to do is we tend to hold on to them for a year, and then they are absorbed within the future year's business planning process. That's what we've done for Rail North. That's what we did for TDF. So I think, again, it's envisaged that we would probably continue a similar mode of operation. In terms of core grant funding, what we have is, as members know, we've got £6.5 million. So the way that we constructed the interim budget was to create a funding envelope which was commensurate with broadly speaking, about 25% of that, recognising the fact that we were going to draw down £500,000 of reserves for the next 3 years. So that gives us a funding envelope of approximately 1.85 million, which is met by core funding in year and reserves brought forward, and a small element of slippage, which is activity that was anticipated to incur in this year as we speak, but is just drifting over into the future years. The one area that isn't in there, and it's not in because we couldn't estimate it, is the costs associated to transitioning to a different organisation. That we don't know what it is yet, because we don't know what the level of transition will be. We don't know what the reduction in personnel will be, and there's a balance between personnel and commissioned activity that we need to work through with Martin as part of the business planning process. But when we do know that number and that comes out of finalising the budget for the full year, that's anticipated to also come out of reserves. So at 31st of March of this year, we're projecting to have £4.4 million of reserves. We're using £500,000 for the next 3 years, and we're also then meeting the transition costs, which will take that level of reserves down to probably a lower level below the £2 million that had been previously discussed as a minimum reserve. So we would revisit that at the board meeting in June, and I think that's probably reasonable based on the size, on the basis the organisation is slightly smaller than it was previously. We're continuing to adopt cost control as we speak, and that all activities are being reviewed to make sure that they are considered to be of the highest priority, and if they are, they continue. If they're not, they're put on hold to be considered as part of the business planning process. And then ultimately, the business planning process would see us come back in June with a fully funded budget and a business plan to support it. So, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Paul. Mayor Jarvis.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The first thing I want to acknowledge is what a very challenging time this is for TFN. The organisation is under very significant pressures, and I do want to thank the staff for their forbearance and for the work that they're doing at what is a very demanding time for them. I think, though, this is an important item because it sets out our priorities at a key moment. Now, I think previously we'd had conversations around including within this a number of objectives and priorities which I don't think currently are represented within the plan. So I'm thinking about the One Voice remit for TFN. I'm thinking about a comms and engagement plan. I'm thinking about objectives for the chair. The reason I highlight those particular things is I think it is really important that we continue to safeguard our collective ability to fight the corner of the north. And I think it's important that we set out our stall and confirm our intention to want to do that. So mindful that pressures that people have been under, but also mindful that this is important for the future direction of the organisation. So if we're not going to be including the points that I've made within this item today, I think, and Martin referred to it, it would be useful in the not too distant future to have a conversation about how we can ensure that those priorities are not overlooked or forgotten about. Because in terms of going forward and in terms of continuing to be able to fight the corner of the north and to hold the government to account, I think these are important parts of our activities, and we just need to make sure that there is resource in place to ensure that they continue in the way that they have done previously. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to come in? Sorry, Louise.
Yeah, thank you. And not repeating what Dan has just said, I'd like to offer my thanks and support to the staff, because I know they're going through a very difficult and uncertain time at the moment. It is disappointing that we've only got funding for 1 year, and I hope that DFT will review that, because we've got a big programme of work. We're ambitious. We've got lots of things that we want to do, and actually building on Dan's suggestions there, I think we need to be clear about what it is we are going to achieve this year, so that at each board meeting we can review that, because there has been criticism, and I think unfounded in the past, that we don't do anything. We know that we do, and I think we need to be very open and transparent about exactly what it is we want to achieve this year. Have some really good smart targets, not just for the chair, but for Transport for the North, so that we can come together and review that. So I think if that can be part of that informal discussion as well, Martin, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. I think both of those points are very genuine, and I think there is also the point, as I said at my opening remarks, just as to how we develop and how we show our relevance right across the region, be it from the city centres, but also to the rural heartlands as well, which are very, very important to where people live and want to use services. Martin, do you want to just come back on that?
If I might, Chairman, just to respond to those points. Board members will remember in the conversation we had on 23rd of February, I set out how the golden thread that has underpinned our work to date remains intact, because our role and our status as a statutory body has not been changed by the changes with the NPR programme. So that focus about championing transformed economic performance, about the productivity, about inclusivity, health and access to opportunities, and the better quality of life, that is fundamentally about what we're trying to achieve as outcomes. And then that leads into those messages that Mayor Jarvis has picked up about championing an inclusive and sustainable North, about having a long-term strategic transport delivery, about putting the passenger first, the user at the heart of what we do, and using that to secure funding. So I think those golden thread remains undiminished. What I need to do through the business planning process is to prioritise our activity in support of those objectives. The board will also remember when we discussed it on the consultation call, there was a letter sent to the Secretary of State saying that we would work within the core funding that we've been allocated, but we would come back with a proposition about how we could add value to that core funding, and that is something I would want to work with the board over the summer, so that we have a proposition that we can put forward to the department in the autumn to illustrate how you can build upon the foundations that we've got and actually demonstrate added value. And I recall, Chairman, that Mayor Driscoll at our call on the 23rd of February made exactly the same point about Mayor Jarvis and Councillor Gittins about the importance within the business plan of having those smart objectives. I think that's important for us as an organisation. It's also then the basis for a conversation with the department, so that when the department in the funding letter said they would want to review performance, we are very clear from the day one what is it that we're being assessed on and how we can demonstrate to the department we are providing that added value. So I think we can indeed pick those points up, but I just thought it would be helpful just to emphasise those in terms of the meeting today.
Okay, thank you, Martin. I just want to run through then what we are about to approve, and that is to approve the first quarter of the budget, which we have the statutory duty, to approve the use of reserves within the first quarter that may be necessary, to note the progress in hand to prepare a business plan for a full year budget for the June board, although, as the Chief Executive has referred, there may be necessary to have another meeting, not a physical one, but another meeting towards the end of April, to delegate to Chief Executive to implement time-critical activities and conclude redundancies, to note the outturns for 21-22, and to approve the Treasury Management strategy. Is that agreed and approved by everybody? Thank you very much indeed. Can we then move on, please, to discuss the integrated rail plan update? And we've got a presentation here from Tim, who's going to take us through this particular item. Tim?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Board. I will mainly take the paper as read. There are two substantive issues for consideration today. The first are the sponsorship proposals set out in Section 4 of the report, for which we're seeking Board agreement to move that work forward today. We're also looking for endorsement of Section 6, and building on sort of Martin's comments around business planning, starting to set out now how the executive are proposing to how TfN will discharge both its statutory role, but also the new sponsor role, both in NPR and indeed more broadly around the integrated rail plan. I think if I do the sponsor proposals first, and I won't go through the detail. What you've been presented with is both the proposals for the joint sponsor board, but also an assessment from the executive about how the TfN sponsor function will need to operate. And clearly that is, as everything else at the moment, we will need to design that very carefully in conjunction with the wider business planning and design the organisation. I think very briefly on the sponsor board arrangements themselves. The focus of the sponsor board is clearly on the outcomes and the objectives of NPR, and that does feel as though that aligns well to the role of TfN as a statutory body and will enable the executive and the members to retain that strategic overview, as well as that check and challenge function that TFN has been very collectively and individually very focused on. As the paper sets out, we will need to put arrangements in place, and we will design that as part of the sponsor function for how officers will engage with the board and with members ahead of the quarterly sponsor boards, quite possibly aligned to the, well, certainly in parallel with the existing arrangements around the Rail North Partnership and the Rail North Committee. It's also worth saying that whilst the new board is proposed by the department to meet quarterly, and that might feel right from a sponsorship point of view in terms of timing and frequency, that actually we foresee and actively discuss in the department a much more frequent and more intensive role for the sponsor. So in between the quarterly meetings, we see a clear role in terms of both working with the individual programme boards as well as having that oversight role. And clearly in terms of engaging both individually and collectively with yourselves and officers, maintaining what I think has been a very strong relationship through the Northern Powers Rail Northern Powers Rail programme of engagement, and that work will continue, and that will enable us, I think, to maintain that local, making sure that we're representing both the sort of local intelligence and integration of MPR, as well as the design, as well as retaining that really crucial one voice for the North in those discussions at both sponsorship and at programme level. So that's the process which, as the paper sets out, does appear to offer a real opportunity to both to influence government and to accelerate delivery, and critically to integrate MPR with other schemes both at local and national level. So that's the process side. I'll introduce section 6 very briefly, which is really starting to set out ahead of the business planning process how we now see the sponsor function being taken forward. I think I would start with, without repeating previous conversations at this board, we know where the missing elements of the integrated rail plan are, and we now know that the full benefits of MPR and HS2 haven't been fully taken into account in the investment decision making in the IRP. So we know there are gaps in the network. We know that government are intending to take an adaptive pipeline approach, and that there are opportunities to bring forward further proposals, as well as to enhance what's already in the integrated rail plan, both through I think the work that our team will do with the department to fully represent the benefits of MPR within the business case work that we do, and in particular undertaking the levelling up assessment will be a really critical part of that work. But we've also started through a working group to identify how local contributions can enhance and expand the scope of the investment proposals in the IRP. And we've had an early conversation with DfT officials about some positive opportunities to do that. I think a priority above all else will be to ensure that we are bringing back together the MPR network, and particularly, as we discussed before at this board, the way that MPR acts as a network is absolutely essential, and the fact that we have missing connectivity now, particularly between not only for Bradford, but for connectivity to Hull and connectivity to Sheffield, as well as suboptimal solutions in other areas, including connectivity to the North East. I think we now got a real handle on those, and it's now about, as the paper sets out, how we take those forward, both working with government and working with yourselves. So section 6 really is an early opportunity to have a conversation about those issues. That was a much lengthier introduction than I'd intended, Chair. Apologies. I'll close there.
Okay, thank you, Tim. I've got Councillor Hale and Councillor Gittings and Councillor Robinson and, sorry, yeah, and Mayor Rayburn and, yeah, okay, right, let's...
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I would make apologies for my lateness, but as it was down to a lack of train drivers, I'm probably not going to. I'm nothing if not predictable, so you would expect me to bang the drum for Hallam East Riding along my East Riding colleague next to us, and 6 does give me some reassurance, and I think you quite rightly the need that those missing links, and obviously the biggest missing link, or one of the biggest missing links, is Hallam East Riding to Selby and to Sheffield, where it makes sort of mockery of the next paper as well when we go on to talk about freight, if we have that missing link to both, not just to our passenger stations, but also to our freight links and the ports. So I would very much want to bang that drum and make sure that, because I think we're all probably of the view that pipelines are fine as long as there's something flowing in them. So as long as that adaptive pipeline has something flowing down it, where we can potentially seek to lever in some resource from outside of the currently agreed IRP, well then that's fine, and I think that's certainly the drum will continue to bang. And I suppose the query there is, how do we introduce, via that co-sponsorship role, how do we introduce that? I mean, obviously we'll introduce that at local authority level, but it's the mechanism for making sure that that drum is continued to be banged, I suppose. Thank you.
Louise.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't want to repeat what Councillor Hale has just said, and I know officers from Warrington and Cheshire have made representation. I think it's really important that we keep that local voice and it's not lost. I think over the last few years a really strong relationship has grown between officers who meet on a regular basis. We've also meet together as Transport for the North, and we need to make sure that, the Cumbria, North East, Hull, Cheshire and Warrington isn't lost all of this. And on a slightly positive note, I actually know where Marsden is now. So, welcome, yeah. So as we went through Marsden on the train from Liverpool today, I thought, oh, right, okay, well, this is how far it's going to get. And then what, as it came down to 2 lines. So it's actually, I looked in section 6 and it talks about where the meetings are going to be held, and there's options of London and Birmingham. They all need to be in the north, because this is where it's about. We don't want decisions about the north being made in London and Birmingham. So please, can we have all the meetings for the co-sponsorship board in the north? And that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Louise. We might also look at other places. They've got this service and we want it in the north, so that's why we should just be calling for a levelling up. There could be an advantage to spreading it a bit, but it's a very fair point. Mayor Braben.
Thank you. Just before I ask my question, can I just take this moment to thank, if it's my understanding is right, that this may be Mayor Jarvis's last TFN board meeting, and I just want to thank him for his advocacy on transport across the north. He's been a real voice for passengers and a real friend to me as well as a new mayor, and I know he's going to be a great advocate for transport going back into Parliament full time, so thank you for that. So, Chair, if I may, I've got 3 questions. One is, I'm not sure if everybody had the letter about the amends to the IRP, about the changing journey times. I'm just wondering what reflections you might have on that. Also, I know that the analytical data, it's the jewel in the crown, isn't it, of TFN. What we don't want is for that to be asset stripped out of our organisation. So can we get reassurance that we'll have access to that data if that's possible? And just finally, there was the mention of the levelling up analysis of the IRP, but just to double check, because it was something that I did ask for at the last meeting, that analysis is also in parallel with the analysis of our option. So we can see really a granular detail of the impact on levelling up that our version would have versus government's. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Braven. We will be coming to the Rail North Committee update, and Liam will be talking about timetables a bit later on and covering it there as well, I hope, later on. So that's when we'll raise that. Councillor Robinson.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm likely to sort of say some of the things that everyone else has, but I probably should say thank you to Tim for his eloquence in continuing to point out the failings of the IRP, because I think none of us are still satisfied with that. And as we move to a co-sponsorship model, it's absolutely vital that's a really robust co-sponsorship model, and frankly we don't want to end up in a situation with what is proposed becoming some kind of glorified consultative committee. It really needs to have the right teeth and involvement for us. So I think from our perspective, we've got to make sure that kind of all those detailed points that we raise on behalf of the North and put into the process, how are they actually kind of going to be properly addressed and reflected and responded and answered to? Not just, oh, well, those are nice ideas. I actually think we need to be putting those ideas in there and getting a very detailed response to show how we influence the decisions being taken on the programme. Just like Louise said, particularly agree how important it is that we've actually got a really strong local engagement in all of this. Now, completely understand how we have a quarterly meeting, it can't be a cast of thousands, so 3 from TFN, 3 from the DFT makes a lot of practical sense. But there will be a lot of very specific localised issues where actually it would make more sense for those localised teams to be really kind of involved in that kind of decision-making process. And I think that the third aspect really is how we as TFN actually work within that structure as well, because really the kind of the quarterly board meetings, if you like, are the kind of the main event, but what's more important is that detailed day-to-day work that keeps on happening, and how are all of our constituent areas going to be involved in all of that work stream to make sure that when our 3 go to that meeting, debating for us and arguing with that collective voice for all of us, and then the action points reflected back to us straight away afterwards. So I appreciate all those things can't be captured in one paper because it probably runs hundreds of pages, but I think there's a lot more sort of detailed structural work we've got to keep fleshing out to make sure our voice isn't just heard, because I think it gets heard, but it's properly listened to and then acted upon.
Yeah, thank you, Liam. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Just to echo some of those comments, I think inevitably the change from co-client to co-sponsor will be viewed in some circles as a weakening of TFN's role in all of this, and therefore I think we need to be even more deliberate about how we reinforce our messages and get our points across. So I would just implore us to be one step ahead of that, perhaps, so that we've got even greater clarity. It's vitally important that local partners are instrumental and in the middle of all of that. And let's not also forget the voice of business as one of those local partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was very pleased to hear in the presentation the mention of the connectivity to the North East. And can I please say that obviously the East Coast Main Line upgrade north of York, it's imperative that it just stay within this plan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As probably one of the more optimistic members of this board, one of the things I think is quite pertinent in the report is the fact that there's 17 TFN members who are being tupied over to DFT, and I think that it's great that we've got some people on the inside, and I think that's I wish every single one of them well to bang the drum from within the DFT, obviously about the things that we've been talking about for the last few years as Transport for the North. I obviously from a Lancashire perspective, one of our main focuses is those non-NPR schemes and the non-NPR wish list, and to be able to make sure that as the co-sponsor we can still input, as Liam's been saying, about making sure that those kind of schemes aren't forgotten about, and that how do we stitch together the NPR and obviously the holes in the NPR, as Tim alluded to. How can we kind of integrate those non-NPR schemes that will benefit the non-city-to-city conversations and the community-to-community conversations? So they're the kind of things that I'd hope that we can see in the co-sponsor role. And again, I'd like to echo the point that was made about when we bring forward our own plans, we're not just bringing forward we'd like this, but fully costed business case, and coming to government with solutions of how we can fix these issues, and doing so in a realistic and credible way. That's the only way I think we're going to get anybody's attention moving forward.
Thanks very much, shall we? Rob McIntosh, Network Rail.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to emphasise the point that the IRP causes a reaction, let's say, but within it, it does open the way to lots of near-term investment that we can be getting on with. And I think in the co-sponsorship role, TfN reps have got a great opportunity to make sure that we maximise the opportunities in the near term, that we push on with the work in and around Manchester for reliability. It paves the way open for the transparent upgrade. It opens the way for some of the access for all schemes. It opens up some of the smaller schemes for the port connectivities, which I think are really important to be getting on with. Some of the work we did before Christmas, when there was a constraint on the freight network nationally, showed it was actually at the ends of the journey where the constraint was, not the rail network between the two. So I'd urge that we really apply that adaptive approach in the near term to make the most of the opportunities the IRP gives us.
Thank you. I think that is a very sensible way forward, and we need to address that. I met, along with Martin, Peter Hendy and Andrew Haynes last week, and I think we want to sort of make sure that we're working hand in hand with Network Rail and seeing where we can sort of see the developments over the next few years, because they are big schemes which are being done and lots of big investment that is taking place anyway. So I think that is very important. I think I've called everybody who wanted to on that particular item. I'm going to ask Martin perhaps to sum up. I'd like to echo what Tracy said about Dan and thank him for his work, and the others, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, who are doing. And also perhaps at this point, Charlie, no wonder you're optimistic with your newborn baby. Many congratulations. You've got every right to be optimistic, and you're still smiling, and he's not obviously not keeping you awake too much. So many congratulations on that. So can I ask first Martin just to make up the points he wants, and then we'll go back to Tim. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. And just to kind of emphasise a few key points for me. First of all, under the sponsorship arrangements, TfN retains its ability to make statutory advice out with that process to the Secretary of State. I think that's really important because it protects and respects our role as a board and our role as a statutory advice. So there's still that ability as TfN to make representations as TfN. I take the role that we've got in the sponsor board as being very positive. As Tim himself said, there is an opportunity for us to work within the system to make sure that those weaknesses that we've identified are addressed. And as we know, some of the opportunities to address those weaknesses actually lie within the capability that we hold within TfN. Just to be clear, we've got that role as a sponsor board. I think it's important that TfN board as a whole, who owns the Strategic Transport Plan, which is the big picture for the entire region, you keep an oversight on the work that we're doing through the co-sponsor board, because of the importance to pick up the linkages to other parts of the region that are not directly covered by the IRP programme, but which connections to are really important. And in that respect, our role with the individual programme boards is going to be very important. So Rob mentioned about TransPennine upgrade. The role that we've been identified there as having is to be that convener, to make sure that the local voice is fed into the work on the TransPennine upgrade, to make sure that it's fed in and it shapes and influences. I've been very clear to the department that those programme boards where we get, as many members have said, the input from the local perspective is absolutely important, because it's better to resolve things at that level than to have them escalated up to the sponsor board. we've got the mechanism being worked out for TransPennine. As Mayor Brevin will be aware, there was an initial conversation about Leeds to Sheffield, I think last week or maybe the week before. So there's progress being made on these individual elements, and it's for us to work with those individual programme boards as well as the co-sponsor board. And that's what we're reflecting as we move forward with the work on business planning for the year ahead. So I think I just wanted to kind of emphasise there is going to be a lot of work that we need to do in support of the sponsor board, and we will want to draw on the technical knowledge that exists across the entire team at TFN, not just those within directly working on the IRP. Tim, there was a couple of specific points, and maybe you're better placed to answer those.
I think some of the specifics were around how do we articulate the needs of the North, and I think that would go through the sponsor function and, as we discussed previously, the new strategic transport plan. But in between those things, a very active dialogue in terms of articulating issues to both the departments and Network Rail. There were questions raised about the role of evidence and data, and I think it's important to say we can't yet confirm that until the grant funding agreement that Martin referred to earlier is finalised. But I think one of the fundamental principles in those discussions has been about actually what we need to have is a shared evidence base. That if TFN doesn't have access to the information, the evidence that's generated by TAME to support work in the department, that purely from an efficiency point of view, we will simply go away and have to replicate that. And that's both from an efficiency point of view, but actually from everybody, both national, regional, and local level, everybody working from the same evidence base. I think everybody accepts that's the important thing to do. Because we're retaining our statutory role, and again, subject to business planning, things that where there are proposals or elements of the NPR preferred network that are included in the IRP, TFN will retain the capacity to do modelling analysis work independently. So we'll work on the basis that we'll do as much as we can with the department and as part of the programme, but we'll also retain that independence and ability to do things separately.
Sorry. Thank you. We'll approve that part of the report, and we'll move on to item number 6, which is the freight and logistics strategy. And Lucy, you're going to do a presentation on this.
Yes.
Sorry, I'll give you a chance to. I'll go on for a few minutes to give you a chance to get your get ready. Okay, fine. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm here today to ask and seek your approval and to adopt our first freight and logistics strategy for transport for the North. Many of you from if you were around in 2016 will remember from the independent economic review that we did that freight and logistics was identified as one of the key enabling sectors driving economic growth in the North. And as such, I think it's very timely that we've now managed to develop a freight and logistics strategy covering the area and underpinning that sector, which is really important. When you think 33% of the tonnage comes into the North, and then it goes around somewhere else, we've got a massive opportunity for this sector to represent that and develop our ask around freight and logistics. The strategy was developed using a significant piece of evidence-based work driven by Atkins, and then I then took that and developed the strategy as you see today. It's been heavily influenced by partners. I mean, I'm really grateful to the Freight and Logistics Working Group who've spent a lot of time sort of inputting, giving me local ideas about what's going on in their area, so we can make the strategy truly northern, rather than just something that's sort of isolated around. I also would like to make sort of reference to Peter Kennan and Matthew Lamb. They've both been very helpful in the development of the strategy. I know there's factual inaccuracies in some of the mapping, which we are seeking to correct, and there are other as we move forward to publication, which we hope to be sort of in May time. So I think that the partner work is really important to reference and thank partners for their input there as well. In terms of the consultation, we came to you last year and said, can we consult? And you said yes. So in January, we went out to a full consultation. That was a particularly helpful time because it was a time when the freight and logistics industry had more time to focus on freight because they weren't focused on Christmas. And so we had massive representation from industry, big companies that I just wouldn't imagine would want to engage with our work, and they did, and it was really, really encouraging. We got over 500 comments, 200 different people interacted with our virtual freight consultation engagement room, which I was really chuffed with. We had a lot of work put in by the comms team to make really nice, striking banners that enabled you to walk around virtually around my little engagement centre, which was really helpful. And it gave a different way to people engage, especially during the sort of time of COVID. From that, main theme emerged was you didn't mention decarbonisation enough. So sorted that out. It was very clear from the comments. So we've redrafted and we've added that into the objectives. We've brought out that decarb theme. When you think about those 2 HGVs doing that 60-mile round trip for Tesco's, they're the first 2. There hopefully will be more, but those areas of sort of road decarbonisation, making sure localised deliveries are decarbonised. And when you think about for the railway, only 10% of our rail network is electrified. What technology is then going to be available for the other part of the journey? So it will be linking into ports and warehousing locations. Scrutiny have given me 8 points of improvement plus 1 to write a letter, which I've taken on board, and we will work with that, and they're highlighted in the report as well. And that was a very good conversation. So overall, even though I've said that there was a lot of corrections to do, it was overwhelmingly positive that we've got a strategy, and it's like a starting point, a springboard to develop stuff further. So in terms of performance reporting and how you can monitor the fact that I'm doing my job in terms of freight and logistics, I plan to develop an action plan based on the recommendations if they're approved today, and then I can develop a work programme that we can return to board in the same way as you requested for the decarbonisation activity, and we can then return to you and describe our progress using that going forward. But there will also be other opportunities, I'm sure, to update you on future work. In terms of the recommendations, they centre around decarbonisation. There's a lot of work on warehousing and then national activity. So finally, I've been asked to mention there's not just the strategy work that we do at TfN. This because freight and logistics isn't just about the north. I've got one of the weird roles at TfN that I've got a national interest. It doesn't just stop at Hull or North East Lincolnshire. It goes on. So I work across. We've got a freight and logistics community of practice that I lead and chair across all the STBs that are active, and then it started to share good practice around what we've done because we were sort of the most advanced in terms of the analysis that we've done around the sector and how we engage with the sector. But it's really developed into not only the good practice sharing, but we get good representation from the Department for Transport around the ports and the future of freight work. So we've identified where we can work with the department across the SCBs and have an impact in that. The report hasn't been published yet, so I can't go into the detail, but I do know that there'll be significant areas we can add value across the STBs into that piece of work with the department, which gives us a national footing. The other thing when it's released, it's still going through ministerial checks, but I know that GBR, Great British Railways, are going to be releasing their, the rail freight targets. I've set up an internal working group to discuss that, but also and then we're going to work across the STBs with GBR on that as well. That'll be a really powerful discussion because this is the first time that we will be able to articulate on behalf of the freight industry that it's that kind of discussion between the push and pull between passengers and freight. There'll be some really difficult discussions to have, but at a national level that they're really crucial to see the freight growth that we have ambition to see. And then, of course, when we developed the first strategic transport plan, we had the support of the Northern Ports Association, and we've continued that relationship with the ports, and they have been supportive of our development of the strategy too. So I'm not just a TFN person. I also look nationally, which I think is worth sort of reflecting as well. So we are going to aim to publish in May, which I mentioned earlier, and I think that's all I have to say right now.
Okay, thank you very much, Louise. I've got a number of people who want to come in. I mean, we have seen massive investment in the ports, and we do overall policy and to be the leads nationally is very important, I think, for TFN. Can I start with Councillor Giddings, and then I see other people who want to come in. Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you, Lucy, for that report. I really welcome this strategy, and it's good to see that it's linking in with other strategies like decarbonisation. It's going to play a really important part. What I would really urge is that we work really closely with the freight industry. You mentioned about that passenger freight. I think that's going to, the more freight we get off the roads and onto the rail, the harder that's going to become. And also the links into Wales. So I'll just give an example. TfW have put in a bid to improve Wrexham to Bidston and ultimately to Liverpool to increase the service, but the freight industry have opposed it. So we need to work really, really closely so that not one, passengers and freight getting equal sort of parity, because we not only do we need to get freight, we need to get people, cars, and people off the roads and into. So it's really, really important, and I'd urge that we really try and build that relationship going forward. But overall, I welcome this. So thanks for all the work that you put into it.
Thanks, Louise. Mark.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lucy. I just wanted to speak in support of the strategy and also your work and your team's work and the comments that you've made just then. Freight is such an important area for business, and also decarbonisation, and I'm thrilled, delighted, but not surprised that you got so many comments back from businesses, and not surprised that those comments were about decarbonisation, because this one really goes hand in hand. And I think I know this is such a priority for TFN. Freight is all about a network, and as you say, it's not just TFN, it's the whole country. So it's really important to sort of consider that. And I think if we can translate some of those comments into actual resource and support, I think the private sector, through the LEP members and the businesses, would be thrilled to sort of get involved. So I think my urge is, as we move from strategy consultation into action, let's really focus these working groups into action, getting things done, supported by as many businesses as we can, because we are on a climate emergency, not just a climate problem. And if we can really make progress on freight decarbonisation, that will be really crucial in the wider debate. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Hale.
Likewise, I think we welcome, and I think we've obviously fed back at those consultation sessions ourselves about the decarbonisation, the point we've made regularly here that you can't have half a rail freight route, you have one or you don't have one really, and it needs to be sort of electrified port to port would be our sort of starting perspective. I think one of the problems we have currently was that obviously a lot of our ports, practically all the ports in the country are owned often by sovereign wealth funds offshore, etc. So for them to make that sort of logistical investment, having the routes is one thing, having people willing to put the infrastructure in at the ports is another. And I think they would want, as we would, I think some signal or symbol from government that those are perhaps binding targets and or like a requirement, because otherwise the danger is they don't make those investments and they look for sort of cleaner HGV technology instead. And I think because currently, although there's a good amount of freight that certainly comes out of Hull, but not as much as Immingham, which I'm sure Stuart might comment on, it tends to be the very heavy goods, non-time dependent, partly because of the routes, partly because of the pathways, partly because of the slow journeys of that. If we were to make that, back to Louise's point, for us to have that real sort of freight shift, there needs to be that reliability. Those needs to be the routes. And I was particularly taken by that the reference to the was it Diggle or something, where he was basically saying it was 176 miles detour unless they upgrade the track. I mean, it's never going to happen, is it? No one's going to make that business decision unless those gauge clearances are improved and unless there's a timeliness and a reliability and a resilience to those services. So I think we probably do need to endorse the strategy, but we do need, in a sense, to press government to make some clearer, bolder commitments around use of freight, because a bit like they've done recently, over the last few years around, say, wind energy, because then the investment will come. Unless it's coming from the public sector, the private sector will want some reassurance that it's not today's fad and it's here for the long haul, won't they? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, certainly, Lucy, on behalf of North Yorkshire County Council, we fully support this paper, this strategy, and frankly, who wouldn't support it? We are very anxious to take goods traffic off our roads in North Yorkshire. We span virtually the whole of the north of England, and we have so many freight journeys being made on our roads that we'd love to see more of this being transferred to the rail network. I noticed that one of these scrutiny recommendations is to put more investment in bridges, which are not strong enough to take as much or heavy freight as it should be. Could you give us some idea, if you are able, to what extent is the weakness of bridges a restriction on freight being carried on our rails?
Councillor Mackenzie, can I also thank you? I think this is your last meeting as well. So can I thank you as well for your service? Much appreciated. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Mackenzie, for your work. I would just like to, again, thank you very much, Lucy, for bringing this forward and all the work that's been done on this. One of the recurring feedback for things like the IRP and the Union Connectivity Review has been, what about freight? Are we doing enough about freight? And so it'd be really interesting to know what is actually going to be the government's and the DfT's kind of thoughts on how do we talk about freight in the long run, and how can TfN have a role to add value from our perspective. What can we do to input into that, not just in the big showpiece kind of strategic consultations, but in the day-to-day kind of conversation. So how could we be potentially, talking out loud, the co-sponsor of the freight strategy moving forward? Maybe that's something that we need to look at. In Lancashire, we've got some really good emerging stuff that's happening. The Huncote rail terminal is a growing campaign and concern, and it's something that I think will be massive if we can make some progress on that, which will obviously, if we had the Skipton's coal rail line, then it would make it a lot easier to do. But I think there's another conversation about local contributions as well, and how can we maybe unlock funding from the potential recipients and benefactors of these improved links, and actually how can we maybe co-fund some of this stuff. So yeah, really interesting stuff, and yeah, we're going to take this away and see how it can benefit, especially places like Heysham, which is kind of the forgotten port of the north, I think. We've got a rail line, we've got a great new road, and all the conversation seems to be about the east, and that's sometimes a little bit prohibitive for us. So yeah, really interesting piece of work. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Swinburne.
Thank you, Chair. Just firstly, just to say what Darren was saying, actually, and Immingham is a small port, but we are the largest in tonnage import and export, and we still hold that record, so we're proud of. Louise mentioned there about trying to get more traffic off the roads and onto rail, which I fully understand, and I think it's very important that we do have a freight and logistics strategy. Just highlighting one point, at ABP, as we all know, Associated British Ports, have just announced a £250 million investment into a new roll-on, roll-off terminal that is going to generate so much traffic. Now, there's going to be a HGV leaving that roll-on, roll-off one every 6 seconds for 24 hours a day. Now, that's a tremendous amount of traffic that's going to be on the roads. And in that context, can I just make a point relating to the report, when we're talking about 3.4 of the report and the objectives, and we were talking about reducing the number of incidences of unplanned closures of major roads around the port. and also network routes leading to severe journey delay. I would hope, I hope, Chairman, that maybe we can be in a bit better dialogue with Highways England over the way that they operate their repairs or whatever you like down the networks. We've had a tremendous amount of problems just recently for the last 4 months with the A180 and the M180 with overnight road closures. But the problem is it's not so bad overnight, but they've got these road closures in 24 hours a day. And I've written to the Chief Executive of Highways England complaining about when we've got no activity on these roads causing further congestion. And I would hope that we'll be able to have a bit of a word with Highways England and say why, if you're advertising overnight works, why you're putting these restrictions in 40 mile an hour down the M180 and the A180 for the last 4 months is just not acceptable. And I think we need to be in a better dialogue with Highways England the way that we are running from the network. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. I've got a few more to come in before we wrap up on this. Mayor Braben.
I just wanted to give my thanks to Lucy and her team for this brilliant work. We're committed to net zero carbon emissions by 2038, when 96% of all the freight is travelling by road. How on earth are we going to get there? So just one comment that I'd like to make is that the M62 is one of the most congested east to west with freight. This is a real opportunity when we're looking at the upgrade. And I know that Network Rail have got some fantastically ambitious plans, particularly around bridge lifting of height, which is great to see. But just the comments about the low liner wagons, whether there's been any further debates about whether that's the cheaper option. And if so, is there a manufacturing plan for those low liners? How do we support some of those choices that are being made? Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Peter Kenyon.
Thank you, Chair. I also would like to thank Lucy. The report was good when it first came to the board, and now it's excellent. And thank you for bearing with me with all my comments as we've gone through the process. I'd just like to mention developing Mark's comments as my colleague about the implementation and the action plan. The backbone of our economy in South Yorkshire, and I'm sure in many other parts of the north, is the small and medium-sized entity. And there is great difficulty in engaging effectively with that sector because they don't have engagement teams and you have to get to the business owner and talk. So I just wonder, in developing these action plans, can we look carefully at how we're going to get the view of SMEs on HGV, LGV, and so on? Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Robinson. Sorry,
Don't worry in the slightest. Completely agree with everything that's been said, and I sort of warmly thank Lucy for all the work. We're sort of more than happy to kind of endorse and support this. I was going to raise a slightly different point. I think now's an appropriate juncture to do that, and I hope kind of have everyone's support in saying this, that I think it is appropriate just to mention the disgraceful behaviour of P&O and DP World in the sacking of 800 British seafarers, particularly as it does affect the Port of Liverpool and the Port of Hull, with key freight routes in and out of our region and across the whole of our country. And I mentioned this now at this sort of stage, that as we take this fantastic strategy forward, can we just seek assurance that Transport for the North isn't going to have any kind of engagement with P&O or DP World as the parent company, so they're not going to pop up on a list of consultees or kind of invited to any working groups or anything like that, because quite frankly, until they reinstate all those sacked workers on their previous terms and conditions, because they did break the law, we should be having nothing to do with that organisation. So I hope kind of we would have everyone's support if we can propose that accordingly.
Adam, I don't know if you want to say anything about National Highways or whether you take that point away and sort of possibly respond directly to Councillor Swinburne.
No, thank you, Chair. Excuse me, Adam Simmons from National Highways. I just wanted to make a few points. I think, again, welcome the strategy that's been done, and I think that look at across the multimodal sort of approach. I think as the strategy recognises, obviously the majority of freight does use road, and certainly we've seen, even when traffic levels overall were low during COVID and lockdown, freight and HGV traffic is the one that's actually increased and gone up before COVID levels. Really welcome the multimodal approach, and would really welcome continuing working with Transport for the North. We've done some very good work with Network Rail, actually to understand what freight can move by rail, what's suited to rail, what's suited to road, and how we can sort of look at that. I think going forward on that, really good to understand the capacity to move freight from road to rail, and the sort of scale of that. And I think actually what we need is to get that balance right of really looking at how we can move freight across a number of modes. And absolutely take your point, Councillor, on we must be able to do more on our roads to really make sure that we are putting the right investment to improve roads where we need to, but also get that traffic management right where roadworks are necessary. And I think that is getting the right type of traffic management in place, but also making sure we get that quality of information, that timeliness of information, so freight and logistics companies can make appropriate plans when roadworks are required. So, but certainly in that specific corridor, very happy to check in offline and make sure that we can respond to you on that as well. But I think that multimodal approach very much welcome. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Scott, did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a general comment, obviously, like everybody else, I think we do welcome this report. It is crucial for the Teesside Freeport. Obviously, one of the major schemes that we're doing at the moment on the highways is the Tees Crossing pinch point. But obviously, there is a lack of freight on the rail access into Teesport, and I think the Northallerton area is one of the most crucial areas, so I think that we've got to concentrate on that. It's extremely important for the future of the Teesport. We want to get as much as we can off the roads, but the road is the main access point at the moment.
Thank you. I'm afraid I can't read your name.
No, don't worry.
Here, so.
Don't worry, Chair. Andrew Weston, Leader of Trafford Council, substituting for Mayor Burnham. And just very briefly, Chair, firstly to make clear that we are very supportive of the paper, and to associate in particular with the comments of Mayor Brabin about the huge potential that we have here to make a significant difference to the number of journeys on our major road network. But it would be remiss of me, representing Greater Manchester today, particularly having sat in the Castlefield corridor for some time this morning, not to mention that the recognition within the paper of the importance of alleviating the challenges in the Castlefield corridor is most welcome. This is the key barrier, really, to the question of increasing rail freight in the north of England, not just because of the impact on Manchester, but because of its ability to undermine other key priorities that we have east-west. But I do welcome the work of the Manchester Recovery Task Force. There are significant challenges there, not least because we are talking about rail infrastructure that carries both passengers and freight, and the obvious tension and challenges there, but also because we see significant increase of the Castlefield corridor if we are not to act swiftly to alleviate those pressures. So our designation on a naughty list as a congested corridor, congested infrastructure designation, is actually welcome in this instance, in that I hope that it will lead to some positive changes very, very swiftly. So welcome the recognition of the challenges in the report, but really would hope that we can come together to press for very urgent action in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And can I thank everybody for the contribution in that, and thank you, Lucy, for your paper. I think the interest that is dominated shows the interest across the importance for the whole of the North in particular, and the work that is to be continued to be done. So thank you very much indeed for the work that you have done on that. I don't know if you want to come back on any particular points.
Just three things I thought I could respond on. Even if I say I don't know, I think it's probably worth responding and being honest. So the first thing was about the sort of freight shift to rail. When you think there's what I was going to mention in the introduction, there's lots of new rail freight flows springing up. So if you think the new iPort in Doncaster runs a train from my port to T-Sport and then back, and then it does that with the same train or same engine twice, and so it maximises the use of that asset. So the old-fashioned approach that you had to have a 150-mile sort of entire trip for your rail freight to work is now absolutely been blown out the water, and the North is leading the way in generating those new rail freight journeys. So I think there's going to be a new era of rail freight developing, but it takes the partnership of Network Rail and of the rail freight operating companies to make that happen, but also where housing locations are and that kind of thing. So it needs to, all those assets needs to be maximised to see that happen. In terms of bridges and weights, I genuinely don't know the answer to that question. It's an interesting question, but I can work with. I'll find a way of finding an answer, and we'll get back to you on that one. How much of the problem is the weights and on bridges? I know of a couple from my own personal experience, as in when I used to work in North East Lincolnshire and Northern Lincolnshire, but I don't know sort of across the north, so I could give you a couple of examples, but it wouldn't be very helpful. So that's that. And then the low lining wagons. There are, when we talk about low line wagons, there aren't that many in existence, and they're sort of spread out. I think the best, in terms of a TFN approach, I think we should be arguing for what they call W12 gauge enhancement, which is making sure your bridges are tall enough and wide enough to get the biggest containers through. And then, because if you rely on low liners, you get a reduction of containers on those trains because the brakes and stuff get in the way. Essentially, you can't fit as many containers on a train. So they're not as good. They're a response, but they're not what we want in the north. We want the gold standard, W12, and that's why I would advocate for move strongly through this strategy.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Just as far as the point that Liam made as well about P&O, I think we all associate ourselves with the way in which those workers were treated as disgraceful. I'm very cautious about making any comments because I don't know what the latest news is on that, but I think we certainly take the point that you made very strongly, and that will guide us as well as to future strategy. Thank you very much indeed, and again, thank you, Lucy, for your presentation, and is everybody content with the recommendation set out on the agenda? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Can we, the interest on that has allowed us to run slightly over, but we've still got some very important items left on the agenda. Can I ask Matt Smallman now to introduce item number 7, please, which is the digital mobility strategy. Give him a couple of seconds to get into place. I think he's got... Okay, Matt, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Board. I think I do have a presentation to run through, which thankfully has appeared behind me on the screen. I'll try and keep this succinct as we're sort of pressed for time. The initial thing is a bit of background and the high-level purpose for this piece of work. Everyone around the room will be aware of the clear ambitions and aspirations for smarter and more integrated travel across the north of England. This was represented previously by the IST programme, which has since closed down. And I joined TFN late last year to try and understand how we can reposition as an organisation to continue to support partners in realising the ambitions they have around this. This piece of work is intended to start taking the place of that IST programme within the future strategic transport plan. And the key sort of elements of it are to add local value. So it's about sharing and scaling some of the quite extensive best practice that exists in the north of England. So areas will have developed ticketing interventions and digital systems that work well for their passengers. And this piece of work is trying to start developing the evidence base for that to support other partners in developing similar schemes to try and avoid the risk of duplication, duplicated cost and duplicated effort, and to try and support some more interoperability as those systems are developed more organically. And then I think the important thing is, in particular, as areas start looking to the future for digital interventions, what opportunities for collaborative delivery across common areas of development exist. So if 3 or 4 authorities or areas are looking to do a similar system, can we start to identify an investment approach that avoids a duplicated ask or a duplicated effort and a more streamlined, efficient delivery of that for those authorities? I think one of the key elements from this piece of work is the steer for it by members. Yep, has appeared behind me. And I think the essential thing is that this piece of work doesn't duplicate effort locally. It doesn't start to override local ambitions, but instead is steered by that. I think what is clear is the need for passenger-orientated decisions around digital ticketing, and this piece of work is to try and support members in realising the quickest benefits for their passengers through working together in developing some of these systems and maximising some of the really strong work that has already existed without duplicating it across areas. We've ran through some of this scope and objectives, which I'm seeking endorsement today through both our executive board, through our lead officer colleagues, each of your authorities, and through scrutiny committee, and each of those elements have contributed to the sort of proposal here today, and it's been very formative and important to have that engagement through each of those levels, because it's starting to give that local focus, that local steer, and the key areas of priority that we want to start teasing out from this piece of work in support of authority colleagues. And I think one of the key things that came from all of that engagement is trying to address some of the pain points that exist around digital ticketing interventions, both in terms of the passenger. I think there was a recognition in a lot of areas that there is complexity and a need for passengers to educate themselves on quite complex approaches. And I think everyone around the table here, each of those authorities has clear ambitions and aspirations documented both in their bus service improvement plans and previous sort of stated plans to reduce some of those barriers and improve some of that simplicity for passengers. And I think this is one of the key areas where by taking a pan-northern view and seeing how each of those areas can communicate and cooperate with each other, you start reducing the barriers between historical geographies in the north of England. So you start aiding and supporting and facilitating. And this isn't TfN delivering directly, it's facilitative, that greater interoperability and passage of travel between areas and within areas. And I think that second element is one of the key pain points as well, is how can we start to support members that might not have the capacity to develop some of these systems from scratch today, and how can we use the experience of colleagues who have done to start infilling that capacity gap or resource gap within some of our particularly non-mayoral combined authorities that have similar aspirations but potentially not the same level of funding or resource to deliver them. So it's about trying to understand what existing evidence base we can start collating from members that are progressing these things at pace to start infilling other areas that are looking to do similar. So I think that touches upon sort of the background and sort of key thinking behind this piece of work. And the next sort of thing is trying to understand the scope and scale. And what I'm proposing for board today is that it is a passenger-driven strategy, but it is, again, aligned with members' existing and, importantly, future plans. And I'm proposing that initially it will be based on existing successes, and they then in turn start identifying the medium and longer term foundations from which more collaboration can be delivered. So this isn't rewriting ticketing plans, this is taking what is planned currently and what opportunities do they create for greater collaboration in the future to maximise that passenger experience and simplify some of the quite complex technical infrastructure behind the scenes. So trying to work through interoperability is sort of a key design principle as areas develop their own local delivery. And I think that is the key thing, that it's still local delivery, but it is enhanced and supported by greater pan-northern collaboration. And I think within that is developing this across the north evidence base. And I think this is not just necessarily in the north of England, but we have Midlands to the south, we have Wales to one side and Scotland to the north, and each of those are developing ticketing infrastructure, and there is a need for an interoperability piece with that as part of union connectivity. And again, each of these areas will be developing an evidence base. I mean, if I were to go around every member in the room today, I'm sure there's pilots in play in your areas at the moment. Those pilots are rich in evidence that can be used, collated and shared by other partners as we try and add and infill that capacity and reduce the need to duplicate effort and reduce the need for areas to start from scratch with systems that have a proven concept elsewhere. Then I think within this piece of work is also starting to develop sort of joined up One North voice on core policy positions around digital and ticketing interventions, and start developing sort of joined up strategies and frameworks. I mean, longer term, it's starting to explore if there are 3 or 4 common ambitions around a particular technology, can we steer a framework for those authorities to work together to implement that, to reduce the cost implications locally, increase the interoperability for that delivery, and start making it easier for passengers to access effectively those local services. And that should hopefully free up local resource to start focusing on how that benefits can be realised in their local market without having to spend time and energy duplicating what has been done elsewhere. And I think moving on is just identifying the objectives of the piece of work. And I think we have touched upon medium and longer term in the previous slide there, but I want to just stress for members that we are in parallel with this strategy focusing on some of the shorter term support we can provide to members through what we're piloting a digital mobility hub through in-year funding from the department, which is explicitly intended to allow us to support authorities as they develop some of their bus service improvement plan ambitions around digital and ticketing, to add that short-term capacity around developing governance, technical standards, and some of the implementation that can then be handed over to the existing local resource, ostensibly one day upskilled by the National Centre of Excellence, Centre of Buses Excellence. So there's a piece of work there in parallel to maximise the short-term benefits for passengers from those existing plans, and then this strategy is looking at the medium and longer-term foundations those shorter-term plans can create for members in the north of England to work more closely together. And again, this feeds into the objectives of this strategy, that the core value and the core objective of it is to add value and capability for partners and encourage collaboration that better passenger experiences. And I think underneath that core objective is, one, to be a catalyst for the sharing of best practice. This piece of work, again, is not delivering ticketing for the north of England. It's a step change from the previous approach. It is delivering a space through which that best practice can be shared more visibly, more strategically, and more focused for authorities that are looking to do similar things. And the second thing is, importantly, to start reducing the duplication of effort and cost and resource requirements across authorities that are doing similar or want to achieve similar ambitions and objectives for passengers. And then the final thing is to try and, one of the key things within Transport for the North remit around ticketing is effective and efficient delivery of ticketing across the north of England, and more joined-up investment in core common areas of digital deployment will be a key driver to driving that efficiencies for both authorities and the north as a whole. So it's making the most of realising joined-up benefits from core national strategies around national bus strategy, William Shapps, and some of the IRP commitments around rail capping as well. And I think that leads on to sort of the final couple of points here is the structure of the report, and it's sort of proposed that it's around three core thematic areas. One of those being the future of ticketing systems. So what does a ticket look like for the future across areas in the north? How are those tickets purchased? And one of the key things is, whilst this is digital orientated, there is a need to reflect the social accessibility of non-digital platforms and how they feed into and sit alongside more modern digital systems to ensure there's no there's no exclusion created for passengers that rely on transport systems when we implement quite high-tech systems that support ticketing infrastructure. One of those key areas is looking at how we bridge the gap between national strategies, particularly, say, National Bus Strategy, William Shapps, and support authorities in maximising the local benefits of those. So if railway capping is coming in, and we would advocate for the pilot of that to be in the north of England, how can we support our authorities in being best prepared to maximise the benefits of that, to integrate that with their own plans for ticketing, so we don't have silos of different ticketing platforms confusing local passengers. The next sort of theme is looking at the case and opportunities created through open and smart data standards. That is a key piece of work linked to the Bus Open Data Service, and these can start to feed into more open source accessibility for passengers, greater accessibility for information provision, and the integration with some of the ticketing systems that authorities and members are keen to implement. And it can sort of streamline that development process as well. And then the final one is looking at the integration of future mobility systems. So this is your active travel modes, your e-scooters, non-traditional modes of travel, or EV integration, car club integration. How can you start looking at the systems and technical requirements to integrate those systems within existing ticketing infrastructure? And again, this would be starting to look at areas that have already explored this, the evidence base for that, packaging that and scaling that. And I think finally, the initial piece of work I'm proposing around the development of this strategy is a State of the Nation style report that will deep dive into all of our authorities in the north of England to look what has been achieved in ticketing, what wants to be achieved in ticketing, and what hasn't been realised due to a lack of capacity, a lack of investment, and what foundations does that set for us to start shaping the strategy in that medium to longer term, and what opportunities does it create for us to support through this hub pilot in the shorter term. And that was hopefully a succinct summary of the paper and report. So if there's any questions or concerns on that.
A number of people. Councillor Hale first.
Yeah, I do thank Matt for the report, because I was struggling with the purpose of the report, I have to say, because it, you know, in some respects, and as long as we're clear that what you're saying it's facilitative, and effectively it would seem to be that we're going to act as a information base and collection point for the various case studies, and you know, almost like a project lab, I suppose, in terms of collecting what's going on. But we have to sort of accept that's about as far removed from the original IST plan as is possible to have, which was looking at something strategic across the north in terms of the joining up of ticketing. That's not this, and my concern about this is it probably, when we do that report, it will show what I've been very worried about, which was the pepper potting of the north that will result from the bus service improvement plans, because no two authorities are the same. We look at, I know you're representing Andy today, we look with envy at the idea of certainly controlling timetables, if not buses, and whereas some of us represent areas where bus services are disappearing hand over fist, and we're lucky to have them at all. So I think it is a very different picture. The other thing about IST, which I do lament going, was we were hoping to use that, certainly in Hull, I think East Riding, to challenge the fact that the price per mile, certainly on rail, is ridiculously iniquitous across the country. So effectively it's much easier to get within the old TPE areas a few miles on the rail, and it's very, very expensive and a deterrent in some of the other non-TPE communities. So I think it was, as long as we're clear, it's about collecting that data, but I worry that, and I won't criticise, I'm not going to criticise the government for the bus service improvement plan per se, the bus strategy, because people haven't, hardly any government spoke about buses for years. So speaking about buses is at least a step in the right direction. But my concern is that will lead to pepper potting, and if we do this collection, we might just find that it's a collection of various differential inequalities, which is a real worry for me, when all that TFN is supposed to be about is trying to bring some sort of homogeneity to the north, and I'm not sure that this will result in that, and that's not. I think we're trying to make the best of what's left of the wreckage of IST, but I think as long as we're clear about that, because it isn't really what we'd originally wanted to get to.
Okay, thank you.
Negative, isn't it? But I'm trying to be balanced, I think, on that.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I think my point comes hot on the heels of what Darren's just said, actually, because I think it's a very good investigative piece of work, and I don't want to preempt what recommendations might come out of it. But I think the elephant in the room that needs to be sort of talked about is the reason that the IST programme didn't go forward is because the big bus companies in the north of England chose not to work with it. That's the practical reality, folks. Now, obviously, bus franchise in Greater Manchester and my own region will be one way of remedying that, but I actually think this piece of work probably will need to boil down to the fact that operators will have to be obliged to work with these type of things in the future. The precedent, I would say, that is already set is the English National Concessionary Travel Scheme. If you're running a bus in stage carriage anywhere in England, actually, you are obliged to take that pass. Now, all your commercial freedoms aren't taken away from you, because you still have the opportunity to negotiate the right reimbursement. But let's be dead honest about it. That National Concessionary Scheme wouldn't work if bus companies could basically just back away and say, we're not doing it. So I think that's where a lot of this work will have to lead to a recommendation back to government that there needs to be an operator obligation to work with it. Otherwise, it ain't going to happen, is it?
Councillor Gittings?
Yeah, just really not to repeat what's already been said, but I think there is an opportunity for us to present those findings, because I think that's what we're going to come up with at the end of it. I'd also like to us to really consider digital exclusion. So we all know within our areas there are, not a small amount of people that are digitally excluded, and there has been quite a lot of work that councils have been doing around this. I know in Greater Manchester they've got a mapping tool where you can look to see where people are digitally excluded. So I think it'd be quite good that we include that. So I think if we see this as an evidence gathering to find out what's actually out there with some really robust recommendations that can come out of it, I think we can sort of turn it into a positive. But, you know, I know, for example, where I'm from, if I want to travel on our local train service, I've got to find somewhere to print out tickets because I can't use my phone. But then if I go on a mainline service from Liverpool, say today, I can use my ticket, so my phone. So I think it's going to be a really interesting piece of work, and I think we might be quite shocked at what we find at the end of it. But I look forward. I think, you know, we have to see this as an opportunity of what we can actually do collectively. So I welcome the sort of work that will go on in the future on this.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I fully support this, and I think my residents in North Yorkshire fully supports this. We are totally signed up to improving digital access, and we've invested £100 million so far in the digital infrastructure in our county, and we view this integrated and smart travel as just another aspect of how we can make both rail and bus travel more attractive to our users. We have a bus service improvement plan worth £116 million over 8 years. It's very ambitious. We're probably not going to get it all. But at the heart of it lies the fact that we want to make our bus services in particular more attractive to people, get them out of their cars and put them on buses. And if we get more people to use buses, then the services become commercial and there will be more services run by the bus operators. So I think we and bus operators share that common goal. They want to get more people onto buses. And I think this digital strategy will help us do just that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I really just wanted to highlight that last autumn, Cheshire East Council launched a demand-responsive transport service known as GoTo. It's a 3-year pilot project that seeks to address social exclusion in some of our most rurally isolated communities, and although it's early days, the initial indications are that it's being very successful. So given that the paper in theme 3 makes specific reference to demand-responsive transport, I welcome your reassurance that TfN will seek to learn from the experience of DRT pilot projects such as GoTo, and we look forward to sharing with you our experience of addressing or attempting to address rural isolation.
Well, thank you, colleagues. I take it we endorse the paper, but I also think that a few warning areas of concern have been shot across. So, Matt, I would hope that in developing the next stage of this, you talk to some of the people around the table who have raised concerns, and also some of them who've come up with some other ideas as well to take this forward. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think those comments are highly welcome. The process so far has been steered by members' views, and it needs to continue to be steered by those views. So if there are concerns or areas of focus, those need to be raised and incorporated into the planning for this piece of work. So I'd welcome all of those as constructive as possible and as open and as available as possible as well. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much indeed, because that is something, again, that stretches right across the whole region and is particularly important in some of the county areas as well. Right, can we then move on to the Rail North Committee update, please? David, I think, is going to take the lead in this, but Liam is also... Oh, there he is, he's gone there, right. Okay, thank you. I should have been able to recognise you, David, but you're going to start, and then Liam is also going to talk into this. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, I'm actually going to ask Liam to kick off, then I'll have a few words, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. We probably should have choreographed a little bit better, shouldn't we, with David, but there we go. Yeah, just to sort of give a bit of an update, and we won't kind of talk through the paper sort of ad nauseum. I think there was kind of, if you like, 3 key elements that came out of the most recent Rail North committee. Whilst we were pleased to see some of the progress on the Manchester blueprint, I think there's still quite a lot of concern, I think is a diplomatic way of putting it, that kind of there still isn't that kind of clarity on what the end game for Manchester, and particularly the Castlefield corridor that Andrew was talking about earlier, and how kind of the right infrastructure solution has been devised and implemented, crucially, so all those services that we've previously had and also have been pledged to receive in future years can actually be delivered and actually having the right time frame around that of when we know that those kind of things are likely to be delivered. I think just as importantly, and probably an even larger concern though, was around the kind of the current state of play with rail services across the north of England, and the timetables for May of this year and then December and then into the future. Particularly because we're still on reduced timetables because of the pandemic and elements like that, and some parts of the north are actually losing further services in May, which we know is causing real concern. Now, I think kind of everyone is practical and pragmatic enough to understand that where there's a human resource issue because of the pandemic, you've got drivers and guards having to self-isolate, that means that some of those services can't operate. And let's have a timetable that is resilient and reliable, but we also need to make sure that past that very short term, how are we reintroducing all of those vital services for all of our communities? I think the greater concern, though, is one of the funding envelope for the North's Railway, particularly in light of the fact that we're getting feedback from operators about how potentially their business planning process for future years may involve kind of difficulties of affordability of services across the north of England. I think from our perspective, particularly in light of the fact that rail patronage has bounced back proportionally stronger in the north of England than it has in other parts of the country. We need to see that reflected in the finances accordingly. I also think it's vitally important as we come out of the pandemic that we're promoting a proper green recovery, not a car-led recovery. And yes, we know that the kind of the Treasury's finances are constrained because of the pandemic, but we should bear in mind that the spring statement last week made pledges around things like fuel duty, which obviously will help motorists. We also need to make sure there is suitable budgetary requirement for the number of services that we see across the north, but also what passengers are paying to use those services if we genuinely want to have that proper green recovery coming out of the pandemic. So one of the kind of elements coming out of the board is very much seeking a meeting with the Rail Minister that we'd like Patrick, as our new chair, to lead. Very much the kind of air all of those points, but crucially seek a proper resolution to this for the short, medium and long term as we build back the North Railway post the pandemic. But David, I'll hand over to you for any more points of detail.
Yeah, just a couple of points if I can, Chair. I think the bounce back in the north really strong. We're up to about 80% demand, but revenue is returning to near normal, driven particularly by the leisure market and the strength of that in the north. So how we can plan services in an agile way to take advantage of those new, stronger markets is really important. Second thing is, yes, we understand the concerns, and some people have been delayed coming here this morning with current staffing issues and reliability. That is at the moment particularly driven by a spike in COVID absences, but as we had at the committee, there are other underlying issues as well. So it's important the operators have in place a robust timetable, and that was a clear message. So in terms of the recommendation, it is to seek a meeting with the Minister. We've got a history of having committee members meet with the Minister, and it was a very positive relationship previously, so if we can build on that. I think to make the points, the concerns about the May timetable, but how we can work together based on that strong bounce back in the north to have a clear plan for recovery and growth in those new markets in particular. And we've been working in particular on some positive ideas that we can have some flexibility in the north really to test some of those new markets, perhaps test some innovative fares and ticketing to actually encourage that return and have some sort of agile timetabling plans around it. So I think we've got a strong offer we can put to the Minister in that meeting. Thank you.
Glad to see I've been promoted chair. That's excellent. Can I just say this is, I really welcome this item on the agenda because this is so important for West Yorkshire. West Yorkshire and North Yorkshire are going to be most affected by this reduction in services. And it's been so frustrating to see Northern introduced further restriction, further cuts to the service without even comms to passengers, and passengers don't even know that their 836 from Sheffield to Leeds is going to be cut. So I've written to the Minister, and in his reply to me, he hasn't acknowledged the second round of cuts or the fact that we have no clarity or confirmation that the norm dated once we get past COVID. I absolutely agree with what has been said. The North has bounced back really healthily in a way that no one else in the country has, and we are having cuts to bus services hand over fist and now train services. This is the antithesis to levelling up. If you want to level up, you have to give people opportunities to get to work and to get to college. So I would ask TFN and the Chair what has been done so far to engage with ministers. Obviously, this is old news about Northern. It's over a week old. And what more can we do as TFN over and above seeking a meeting? Because we have to say to the companies that this is counterintuitive about building back patronage. If you keep eroding this service, it is managed decline. It is the antithesis to growth. So I would hope there is a robust, strident response from TfN. And of course, we know that COVID is being used in some quarters as a smokescreen for further erosion. But it's not just about that, is it? It's about the training as well. And I would hope that Northern and the unions could come to swift conclusion to their debate about moving forward on terms and conditions, etc. Because this is impacting massively on West Yorkshire. And this is not just about my region, it is also about the North. We are all interconnected. We cannot have this slice every 6 months of the service and without any understanding of what we're going to get back in return. So I would really passionately ask for you, Chair, to make representations to government at the highest level, that they must have conversations with the operators as well, to make sure that we're not left in this invidious position where our transport network is being cut hand over fist for the people of the North. Thank you.
Yeah, just really building on what Mayor Braben has said there, and talking about Avanti on the West Coast line. I don't know what it's like for the rest of the West Coast, but certainly from Crewe to Holyhead, the services have been drastically reduced. We have 2 a day now from Chester to London. We've got the tourist season coming. There's going to be lots of people not using the train because there aren't enough trains. And it's the same excuses that we've heard from Northern around, you know, the impact of COVID, but also the amount of money that they're getting from government. So it feels like that connectivity across the whole of the North, we feel like a branch line, to be honest. And, you know, it's one of those things, once it's gone, and will it ever come back? And I think we need to have a really strong collective voice around that. Thank you.
Mayor Jarvis.
Thank you very much. Well, I completely agree with the points that have just been made, particularly around the strong collective voice that I think we need to have in terms of expressing our concerns. I did raise my concerns with Wendy Morton, the Transport Minister, yesterday, and I've raised my concerns with Northern. I think whilst we all understand that there are operational challenges that Northern and other operators are facing, this is particularly disappointing given the optimism that we've shared around services bouncing back and the recovery of rail services in the North. So this comes at a particularly unhelpful moment. I think also it's just worth reflecting in this forum in a way that we don't do ever so often, that whilst we usually have important conversations about grand economic strategy and we look at these things in the round, the reality is, for people in South Yorkshire and for people right across the north of England, this will impact massively on their daily lives. I noted yesterday, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of sort of forbearance to make this point. There was a local journalist, Christian Johnson from Yorkshire Live, and he got on the 8:16 train from Sheffield to Leeds to speak to passengers about their experience of the service. Sarah said the service is often chaotic and only runs to schedule every other day. Paul has just recently taken a new job in Rotherham. He now says, I wouldn't have taken the job if I'd known what the trains were like. It's another stress, and most days it's late. David has travelled on the same service from Bolton-on-Dearne to Leeds every day for the past 25 years, but from May he'll have to change his routine. He said it's going to have a massive impact on me financially and in terms of time. So it is clear that the public aren't happy. I'm not happy about it. Collectively, I don't think we should be happy about it as a board. And let's work together to see what we can do to improve it. Thank you.
Peter, you wanted to come.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add my support to the idea of a meeting with ministers, and I support all the previous comments. There are other operators operating services, key services across the north. Louise has just mentioned Avanti. I could mention cross-country trains. I could mention East Midlands Railway. Some of the issues that they face are not necessarily COVID or not necessarily anything more than DFT have dictated what will happen. And so this meeting with ministers is really important. So I'll give you just one example, which is our service from Sheffield, Manchester to Liverpool, where East Midlands Railway are short of approximately 40 trains because of decisions made by DFT and where trains will be cascaded to after new trains are introduced. So a decision has been made centrally about where trains will be deployed, and that has led to disruption of services on that route because they don't have enough trains to keep the service operating at an efficient level. So I would ask that we could collect those problems that exist with other operations as well before we engage with ministers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Councillor Mackenzie.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. There was one question I raised at the Rail North Committee, and I noticed it didn't reach the minutes, perhaps understandably. Councillor Hale mentioned this morning that he was late arriving here because of the short-term cancellation of a train. And I think hundreds of, if not thousands of people today have also missed trains because, according to the board here in Leeds, driver or staff unavailability. And this is something that's even worse, really, than the reduction in the timetable because these things are coming at us without any notice at all and spoiling journeys. The question I asked at the Rail North Committee and the rail operators, the two train operators, Northern and Transpennine were there, is that could this committee be doing a little more, and especially some of the Labour members of this committee who've spoken just now complaining about timetable changes, in order to help the train operators reach an agreement with the unions in order to reduce this risk of driver and train staff availability. This has been rumbling on now for weeks, if not months, and it is making it very, very difficult for residents of North Yorkshire, whom I represent, to travel efficiently and effectively and make their appointments because these things are happening with very little notice at all. I didn't really get a satisfactory reply at the Rail North Committee, and I'm hoping today we can decide on whether we can use our influence as a board or as individuals in order to bring about a resolution of these problems which are currently existing.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got two very different points I'd like to make. Firstly is I was due to get on the 8:28 train this morning from Lancaster. My connection was at Manchester, Piccadilly to Leeds. I got informed late last night that the Manchester Piccadilly to Leeds service had been cancelled this morning. It turns out that the 8:28 was delayed, so I would have missed the connection at Manchester anyway, even if it hadn't have been cancelled. However, I think that the on-the-day cancellation issue is massive. I think that it has the potential to be a loophole that operators can use to try and not present us with quite so bad real timetable changes by just saying, right, well, we won't remove every service from the timetable. What we'll do is we'll do it by the back door by instilling these on-the-day cancellations instead. I think it's a loophole. I think that they're going to exploit it more, and I don't know whether or not in the meeting with the minister we need to actually make that point that that's loopholes got to be closed. They've got to be punished, or there's got to be KPIs the KPIs in which the train operators have to operate needs to include real time on the day cancellation. Has got to be one of the things that we hold their feet to the fire about. My second point is totally different, which is about, actually, I think when it comes to the recruitment issue and the personnel and HR side of this, I think maybe there's an element of opportunity for Transport for the North here. Why is there no one saying, go and be a bus driver, go and be a train driver at the moment? There doesn't seem to be really much in the way of recruitment, especially young people. I think it's a great opportunity, career for a lot of people. It's a lot easier to become a Yodel or an Amazon or DPD driver, and much more attractive. Bus drivers are leaving the industry because that you don't have to speak to customers if you just deliver parcels, do you? And I think maybe there's a piece of work that we could be doing, which is actually about trying to get more people, especially young people, into transport industry as a whole. And I just wondering whether or not there's an opportunity for us to, again, demonstrate our value.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ale.
I just want to remind Don that, to my knowledge, the RMT is not affiliated to the Labour Party. They're aligned with it, and that's a very strange situation. So we don't have any more ability to influence them than possibly you do, other than by the wider persuasion of colleagues, and we'd always seek to do that, as I'm sure others would. But we don't have any organisational links.
Mayor Braben, you wanted to come back in.
I just wanted to follow on from Charlie's, Councillor Edwards' point about drivers. And I would like to alert him to the work that we've been doing in West Yorkshire, particularly around bus drivers. We heard that part of the problem was they couldn't recruit, so we've worked with, and it's quite unique across the whole country, we're working with all the providers, all the bus companies to run, aiming to get 1,000 new drivers into post. And we've done a big campaign, big PR campaign, particularly around women drivers. You have a problem of drivers. Most of your drivers are men. Well, you have a whole workforce out there that could potentially be brilliant drivers, and that is women and young women. There's a young TikTok star. I would like to send you a link. She's a bus driver and has got many young people interested in bus driving. And also, as the Mayor, we have opportunities to help with training, which is exactly what we're doing around HGV and bus drivers. We have invested in training for West Yorkshire. So if anybody would like to see that brilliant work that's been done in West Yorkshire, we're happy to share.
Thank you. Councillor Gittins.
Yeah, just really to end on a positive note, there was a really good article on Look North West last night about Northern had put something on about two people. So there was a bloke who had given it work as a banker to become a train driver, and a woman who worked for a housing association who was a conductor. And actually, I wanted to be a train driver at the end of it. And I thought, I'm probably too old, they won't have me. But it was a really good, I think we need more of that, because it felt a really warm, positive article. So.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. Look, there is a number of issues there, and there is no doubt in my mind that one of the most important things when people rely on public transport is reliability, because the sort of not having it or cancelled at very short notice actually puts people off completely the whole public transport usage of. So reliability has to be key and core, and you know, we can understand the train operating companies have problems as far as staffing is concerned, but that doesn't mean to say we want to see a diminution of service, which is what has been concerning around the table. So I think I will certainly take forward, I discussed with Liam beforehand the fact that these meetings used to take place. Wendy Morton is relatively new as far as taking over that portfolio, but I think we'll go back to her and say these used to take place with Chris Eaton-Harris when he was doing the job, and we very much welcome them to go forward in the future, because getting that reliability of service is vitally important. And everybody knows we've gone through 2 years of extremely unusual circumstances, and it's how we rebuild and make sure that reliability is back following those extremely unusual circumstances that we've gone through. So I think we'll try and bear in mind everyone's comments. Thank you very much, and thank you, Liam, for your update, and David. We are slightly running a bit over time now, but there's just a couple of points that we want to still carry on to cover. So can I ask Simon to talk about electric vehicle charging infrastructure?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Board. And if I may, I'll take the paper as read to save a bit of time. and just highlight the key points coming out of the paper. So this is really seeking your support to publish our evidence base and framework for the region, which outlines the charging infrastructure requirements that we see right across the north. This is something that we've developed in conjunction with the partnership across TfN and further afield through our regional forums. And it really is based on applying the powerful analytical modelling tools within TfN. It develops one of the most advanced and comprehensive evidence bases at the moment for charging infrastructure, identifying the mix of different charging needs across the region, so that we can see what we need in the right place at the right time across all areas in the north. We can do this by region, but importantly, we can do this at a really spatial, granular level that's useful for local authorities, and we've had some really positive feedback from our partners across the region on that. This will all be made available to partners for use towards locally specific needs, because that's a really key point for all of this work. Section 10 draws your attention towards where we'd like to go with this in terms of communicating, applying the evidence, and advancing that. I think and we'll do that all in conjunction with our regional forum. Important to note that the government published the National EV Strategy last week, and we've been working closely with the government on that, both in terms of informing what local authorities see, the challenges and opportunities across the region, but also the roles that the TfN and subnational transport bodies can play. And we're very much at the forefront in terms of this sort of stuff in that space. Communicating the framework and the evidence that we've got will really allow us to act quickly in terms of acting as a regional centre of excellence, to support local authority actions that are already ongoing at the moment, to pick up those national activities that were mentioned in the strategy last week, and we've already written to the department prior to that to set out the opportunities that this framework provides, but also supporting our public-private engagements as well, and creating that attractive investment environment across the region. So I guess just to close, to say that this is really a focus on supporting delivery at scale and pace. The biggest increase in charging needs is through the 2020, so it is a strategy to delivery piece of work that the board have mentioned previously. And it's really setting out that ambition that we want a consistent transition to EV, which is accessible right across the north. So I'll leave it there, Chair, in the benefit of time, if that's okay.
A couple of points briefly. I think your final comments are really crucial about the consistency, because my concern with if it's just sort of a market-led solution, outside of perhaps some cities in the more rurally sparsely populated areas, will there be that incentive to provide them? And for people to get an electric vehicle, it's as important where they're travelling to, as I've said before here, than the charging source point at home, because they won't buy one if the journeys they make don't have that charging infrastructure the other end. I also want to bang the drum for sort of poorer cities like the one I represent, where 45% of people don't have access to a car, which means the cars that are on the road are far, far older. So again, there won't be that sort of market-led imperative necessarily to transfer across, which means some cities and areas will be left behind. So I think that consistency and how in a sense that fits within a government framework are absolutely crucial. In a final point, I would say, was the answer, as we know, isn't just for everybody to not have a diesel or a petrol car and just have an electric car instead, because A, the pricing point will stop that, but secondly, you're just going to have car jams full of electric rather than fossil fuel cars, and it's still got to be modal shift in there somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I do welcome the report, but as a semi-rural borough, we do face a significant challenge with the rollout of electric vehicle infrastructure. We have applied for government funding for assistance, which, if successful, will give us roughly about £1 a head of population, but even that will only equate to about 30 new EV charging points for the borough. But when I look at the map on page 198 of the report, figure 2, and I see those swathes of red and orange it does occur to me that many partners around the table are probably in the same situation as we are. So a couple of questions, if I may. Firstly, what action could TFN take to help resolve this alongside local authorities and the commercial sector? And is there any potential to lead on the procurement of a pan-northern framework contract that other partners could call on and thereby benefit from economies of scale?
Councillor Brown, Mayor Brown.
I just want to add my voice to follow on from that comment that this is it's national infrastructure. Why are we having to bid into these beauty contests again and again? And certainly I would back the idea that we have a pan-northern framework, that we know where we need to have our EV charging points. But again, why are we having to bid when this is about national leadership? Government must lead from the front.
Liam, did you want to, sorry?
Yeah, just similar points as well, because I very much welcome this. I think it's right we're doing it on a northern footprint, because recharging of electric vehicles becomes much more tricky with longer distance journeys rather than sort of short local journeys. I'm sure there'll be lots of things that can be teased out in all of this, not least the kind of the capacity of the grid. You know, does the actual kind of energy mix across the north actually kind of, is it there to support electrification of vehicles? Lots of other things like the need to kind of book slots, electrical vehicle charging points, because it's not like a conventional petrol station where you can queue up and within 2 or 3 minutes you can fill up. You're going to have to think about, at best with a rapid charging point, having about 3/4 of an hour to park the thing up. So there's those kind of demand-led models that we can sort of properly investigate. But I think the final point is the most important one that Darren made, actually, that electric vehicles are a key component part of the road to net zero. They are not the silver bullet. You know, if everyone in this room would come in an electric car, well, that's great, but actually it's not as good as everyone coming on a train or a bus, or kind of even active travel as well. So let's make sure in the narrative we see this as kind of a component, but actually it's more important people using public transport and active travel as their main means of travelling around.
Sorry, Councillor Dunn.
Yes, just it's not part of the EV strategy, but in terms of freight, I believe that one of the constraints from freight operators moving to hydrogen is the lack of infrastructure and network. So, I mean, that needs to be looked at as well. If that is going to be more in the long term, the favoured technical solution for freight and the sort of level of energy demand that has compared to moving a car, you know, is going to be that we need to have that hydrogen network as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And Simon, thank you for your paper. I'm sorry we've had to rush it slightly, but we will want to return to it in far more detail, because I think it is very, very important for the future. But even although we've had a short discussion on it, I think there were 1 or 2 interesting points that you've seen that the board wants to develop, and we will take that on further forward. Can I move on then to the governance report, which is fairly straightforward. Julie's not here today, but Martin, you're going to lead very quickly on this.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'm wanting to lead on it quickly because I want to give Tim an opportunity in a moment just to talk a little bit about what we've done with MPR over the last 5 years as an opportunity to say thank you to Tim and the team. You've got the report before you. It's been asked, you made some recommendations at your consultation call about representation on various committees. We're just asking you to formally ratify that at this opportunity. There has been an initial meeting of the General Purposes Committee as a consultation call. One of the things they were asked to do is just review their own terms of reference. They had a good conversation, you've got it there. They're recommending to you that you confirm the terms of reference as they are currently set. And finally, it's just to report back to you the review that was undertaken by the Scrutiny Committee, their function. You've got the report back in the report, so the paper is there for you to consider and hopefully support the recommendations.
Any comments? Everybody content? Oh, Councillor Scott.
Can I just apologise? I think communication problem. I don't think you had the nominations from Tees Valley. It's Mayor Houchin and myself. It was the communication problem. So I do apologise for that.
And if I may, Chair, I know that Councillor Hale's been nominated for the north of the Humber, so we've got that. I think it's just one nomination left.
Thank you, Councillor Daw.
Just a quick one. Conscious that there may well be significant changes between now and June with elections and people standing down and so on. Would it be helpful to have an update in terms of member of the various forums, you know, to that future meeting once the new people are in post and the different officer responsibilities and so on?
Yeah, that will be certainly taken care of. Can I, okay, and Councillor Scott, can I thank you for sorting out the communication problem? Right, as Martin indicated, there is just an additional item because tomorrow does mark the end of the relationship that we with Northern Powerhouse transferring across to the Department of Transport. So Tim, you've got a couple of slides you're going to just tell us about what's been happening and what will happen in the future.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Board. We thought we'd just take a minute as Northern Powerhouse Rail is about to move to its next stage to look back and see what we've actually achieved together. So it all started back in 2015 with the publication of the One North report, and with that came a new vision and strategy for rail across the whole of the north of England. So throughout 2016, the team began to formally develop the route options for the programme and prioritising these for further feasibility development. 2017 saw HS2 conducting option sifting on the touch points that would later that year be agreed by the TfN board to be included in the HS2 hybrid bill. We moved into sequence 3.2 in May 2018, and the first stage of the sifting process on MPR of course took place. Then in March 2019, the strategic outline case was approved by the TfN board and submitted to government. The sifting options left, we started to go back through those again in 2020, and the majority of this work was undertaken, excuse me, where the team were working remotely, of course due to the pandemic, and this was an unbelievable team effort from everybody involved. So fast forward to 2021, SIF reports were finalised and the TfN board agreed their initial preferred network. And finally, following publication of the Integrated Rail Plan in November last year, the core NPR network is identified and receives initial funding. So in effect, that's 7 years of hard work, but what does 7 years look like on a page? Just next slide, thank you. So we've had over 500 people work on NPR to peak, from co-clients, delivery partners, Network Rail and HS2 Limited, and the rail supply chain. Since 2020, we've achieved an average engagement score of 85%, well above our target of 80. Over 480 deliverables have been achieved across sequences 3 to 4.1, and of course finally to have a grip 2 from all the corridors. And 55 tier milestones achieved this year alone on the programme, all delivered on time and below budget. We identified approximately 4 billion in agreed cost savings, and a further potential of 5 billion was being targeted. Focusing on the scope of the programme, we sifted 118 options from across 7 corridors and 4 hubs down to just 27. And across the whole of the north, we identified and worked with over 350 stakeholders, engaging regularly with 135 of those, including of course the 20 northern leaders and 11 local enterprise partnerships. We communicated, collaborated and created a one-team culture, culminating in us winning the Team of the Year awards from the Institute of Civil Engineers. So they're just a few headlines of a really jam-packed 7 years, and it's a big thank you from myself and the team and all involved for your help, support and collaboration. I will be leaving TfN under the TUPE process with my colleagues, and we will be starting with the Department for Transport on Friday. So we look forward to working closely with you, as always. Thank you.
Tim, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for your presentation. I was there at the start, and I'm here at the end, so that's in different guises. But thank you all very much. And can I, in drawing the meeting to a close, can I thank everybody for their attendance today? I think we've had a constructive meeting today, and some of the issues that have come up, we've got to make sure we take those forward. Some of the concerns But overall, I think we've had a very, very constructive way forward. And to those who won't be around the table again, thank you very much for your work in the past. And we look forward to keeping an association with you over the future as well. Thank you very much indeed.
If I may, board colleagues, we've now got lunch available. It's outside in the restaurant. There is an area for set aside for TFN members, so please do take advantage of that. We start the partnership board meeting at 1:45. 1:45 we start the partnership board.